Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our last talk of Migweek. It'd be a pleasure to introduce Beck Jones, who works in Natural England, who's talking about bird flu tonight. Before I do so, because it is the last time we will all formally get together, it would be remiss if I don't really sum up our thanks to a great many who have helped make this Migweek so special. So in no particular order, could I please pass on thanks of everybody in Flamborough Bird Observatory to all of the presenters from Beck all the way through all week. We've had online talks and we've had presentations live at both Bempton and at Flamborough. So many thanks to all of those that led those talks. Thanks to the guided walk leaders. There's been guided walks going, of course, from Bempton and Flamborough. Thanks go to the ringing teams, again, Flamborough and at Bempton, who have held demonstrations on virtually every day. Many thanks for the volunteers, for Tony and the volunteers for manning the shop at the LSC Centre. For Keith, of course, for his VisMig sessions, mainly at Hummunby Gap, but we did tempt him to make a trip onto the headland as well. Obvious thanks to both YWT and the RSPB for hosting us at both Bempton and at the LSC Centre. Without that hosting, we just wouldn't be able to have the Migweek in its current form. I'd like to give thanks to Anna Cowie, who is behind the scenes helping run these online events. Certainly couldn't do that myself. I wouldn't know where the start button is. Alan Rodder and the Moth event, Wild Space with the Cetacean Watch, and Tony Hood for social media content, amongst myriad other things that Tony's led on. It really has been a team effort. I'm pretty sure I haven't left anybody out, but if I have, I apologise and thank you for your contributions. Not least, of course, from all of the visitors from far and wide that have made this week so special. It's been great to see so many birders and visitors from all parts of the UK here this week. And just as impressive, it's been great to see so many birds from all parts of the Northern Hemisphere almost this week. We've just been talking about the spectacle of 11,000 redwing making landfall, or 10,000 pink-footed geese, creating a cacophony of sound on a daily basis. And then all of the rarities amongst those, of course, from red flank bluetail to a showy raz warbler, which entertained on one of the guided walks. So it really has been a great week. It's kind of ending tomorrow in not so great a weather, and that's curtailing a few events, unfortunately. So there will be no ringing demonstrations tomorrow. There will be no guided walks, unfortunately. Combination of wind speed and rain has knocked those on the head. There will, however, still be the VisMig session that Keith's leading at Hummunby Gap tomorrow at 7:30. For those of you who are enthusiastic enough to leap out of bed at such an ungodly hour. So that's happening. And then Tony will be manning the shop at the LSC Centre from 9 till 12. So those are the two things that are happening tomorrow. It'd be great to see some of you attend those. Right, so to this evening. So this evening is about bird flu. Been discussing maybe not the most uplifting topic, but I mean, amongst everything to do with viruses, I guess eventually there is hope. So it'll be interesting to see Beck's take on that. So Beck Jones is a marine ornithologist. She works on seabird conservation for Natural England. She spends quite a lot of time, I guess, thinking about offshore wind farms, about seabird monitoring, and she's got a particular interest in non-native species and also disease in wildlife. So I guess that is the great segue to Beck to talk about bird flu tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Craig. So I think I just hit share screen now, do I? And it should come up. Do you see it? Good. Okay. So thank you to Craig and thanks to Migweek as a whole for having me. And thank you to those who've decided to attend or rewatch this talk. I think you're very brave. I know it's not the most uplifting subject, and I know we all have enough bad news in our life, but as we were saying just before, it's important, and the more we know, the better prepared we are for whatever may happen. So the title is How Bird Flu Went Viral, because I wanted to focus on this idea, this question of how we ended up in the situation we're in now, because it really felt like when this all kicked off properly in 2022, it felt like nobody saw it coming, and there was a lot of panic and a lot of confusion and a lot of very steep learning curves. So that's what I wanted to cover. I should get a next slide coming up. Maybe not. I seem to be having a technical issue with slides. I may need to stop sharing and reshare again. If I can do that. Oh, can you now see the first slide?
Not at the moment, back now.
No. Okay. Let me see. Can you see the slideshow?
So started screen sharing. Double click went to full screen mode on my screen. Blank.
It says my screen sharing is paused. Apologies about this. Right, I'm stopping it again. Maybe I can. Do, do you have an email address I could send it to? Anna. Okay, hang on. Let me see if I can do that. Right, I'm going to try to do that now. That should be winging its way to you, Anna. I'll just have another go here to see if I can make it. Right.
Awesome.
Slowly but surely. From the beginning. Okay. You can see that? It's moving. Okay. Sorry about that. So slide one. I wanted to start with, and this is where I have to also give a bit of a disclaimer that I am not a virologist. I'm not an epidemiologist. It's not my area. I'm an ornithologist who's just been on a really steep learning curve over the last few years. So I'll do my best to explain it as I understand it. And I'm also obviously coming at it from a conservation perspective. But just to start with, I mean, viruses seem to be becoming ever more important in our lives, and even the question of what is a virus is not such an easy one to answer. So I just wanted to cover some of the main things that I think are the most important things to remember about viruses. So number one is that they need a host cell to replicate. So they basically break in to the cell of their host and they hijack the cell's own replication mechanisms to create more of themselves. And they're very, very small. So this is actually an electron microscope picture of the bird flu virus inside some mammalian cells. Those are the blue ones, the mammalian cells, and the bird flu viruses are the little red ones. So you can see how much smaller they are even than a mammal cell. And partly linked to being so small is not living very long and basically having a strategy of live fast, die young, leave lots and lots of replicates of yourself. And what that means is that they evolve very, very quickly. So it's a completely different scale. So this is the other trick they have up their sleeve. As well as evolving very quickly in the sort of natural way that we understand evolution to take place, they can do this thing called reassortment. So that's when two different viruses infect the same cell at the same time, and they can basically shuffle their DNA or their RNA, and they can create a whole new virus that's a combination of both of them. So that gives them the ability to come up with new viruses very, very quickly. We have stalled again. Maybe eventually it will work. I try and that works. Okay, so this particular virus that we're talking about, when you hear people talk about bird flu or avian influenza virus, that's actually a whole group of viruses. So this isn't one virus that we're talking about. It's a whole sort of family of viruses. The avian influenza virus is actually the same species as our own seasonal flu virus, which is an influenza A virus. And then within that, you have all these avian influenza viruses, and there are different ones. And this here is the sort of basic anatomy of an avian influenza virus. You see it has RNA in the middle, it has a lipid envelope around it, and it has all these little sticky outy things on the surface. And those are what help it to break into the host cell. And this is where the names that you may have seen come from. So H5N1 is obviously the one that we've been worried about the most, but there's also H5N8, H5N5, H7N9. There's all different ones depending on these sticky outy bits. The H is hemagglutinin, the N is neuraminidase, and you don't need to remember those names. The other important distinction to make with avian influenza viruses is that some are low pathogenic, so or low path viruses, and some are highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses. That's HPAI. That's what we've been worrying about these last few years. That's a virus that causes high mortality, and it's defined as a highly pathogenic avian influenza virus if it kills over 75% of chickens. So this is, I think, the most important part of the talk, probably, because we get to this question of whether or not this is a natural disease. And this is something I've heard quite a lot debated, people saying, you know, well, disease is natural, it occurs naturally, so we shouldn't be worrying about impacts on wildlife or, potentially even using it as a reason not to have to do anything about it. And it's not that simple. So the low path viruses, the LPAIs, low pathogenic avian influenza viruses, those have been around for a long time. They naturally occur in the wild. They circulate in wild birds, mostly water birds, particularly wildfowl. And they don't really kill that many. They don't need to in order to keep themselves circulating, and they sort of exist in a balance with those wild bird populations. Highly pathogenic avian influenza is something that has only ever evolved in the context of industrial poultry farming. So if you look at these chickens, try and imagine you're a virus. If you're a virus, you don't really want to kill your host under normal circumstances, or if you do, you don't want to kill them too quickly because you want to be able to pass yourself on. So you want to hang around within the host body for as long as possible. If you're in a situation like these chickens, if you kill one chicken, even if you kill it really fast, that's not an issue because look where the next chicken is. So this kind of high density situation, also where potentially these animals are stressed, etc. And there's high turnover, so you keep giving it new chickens to infect. This is how come highly pathogenic avian influenza virus evolves. And so before sort of singling out China, I wanted to say that this highly pathogenic evolution has happened on multiple occasions in different parts of the world, always in poultry systems, but it never really escaped and caused issues before. So it's not just happened in China, but in China in 1996, we had a new strain of HPAI emerge in domestic goose farms. So it was in the province of Guangdong, and that's why this whole family of viruses is called the goose Guangdong lineage. And they're the ones that have been causing all the bother. And it happened so this top picture is an aerial photo of a commercial goose farm in China. You can see it's very high density. It's also open to wild birds. So wild birds will be coming in and mixing with these geese, stealing their food, etc. And they will therefore be able to infect the domestic geese with low path bird flu. Now that the virus is in this high density environment, it can evolve into high path bird flu. And then we start seeing it spreading throughout various parts of Southeast Asia around there. One of the reasons for that is that there's a lot of this is a live bird market in Shanghai. So people like to buy the birds alive. They're moving them around from different parts. They're creating opportunity for the virus to mix, and you start to get human cases, which obviously worries people. People like that are very exposed to high levels of virus in birds like this. And we also have it spill back over into wild birds. So probably much the same way that the low path got in, the high path gets back out to wild birds. And then we start to see mass mortalities in wild birds. And the first time this properly happened was at Qinghai Lake in China, which is marked here on the map. This is actually already quite a long way from Guangdong, which is down here in the southeast. So it's already moved between when it first emerged, but it suddenly pops up in this lake in the summer of 2005. And this is a lake where there are breeding bar-headed geese and breeding gulls, and it causes mass mortality of bar-headed geese as well as brown-headed gulls and great black-headed gulls. And this is not only an important breeding site for these birds, it's also a wintering site for birds that breed further north, and a migration stopover site. And this is a quote from an article that came out at the time in 2005 from Chen et al. They said, "There is a danger that it might be carried along the bird's winter migration routes to densely populated areas in the South Asian subcontinent and along migratory flyways to Europe." And they weren't wrong, basically. They saw that coming. So the Qinghai Lake outbreak was the summer of 2005. By autumn 2005, the virus had spread to Eastern Europe, and by early 2006, it made it to the UK. So then we have this question of how it did that. So this is a map. This is from Wang et al. 2008. This is a map of the major flyways in this half of the world. We have the East Asian Australasian flyway is the furthest east here in blue, the Central Asian flyway here in pink, and the European one, the Black Sea Mediterranean flyway over here in green. And we can see that all three of these flyways overlap up here in Siberia. This partly just because of the shape of the Earth. So we have Qinghai Lake here on the map. We see birds going north from there to Siberia to breed. And then, very quickly, this virus can find its way halfway around the world, and it did. And you start to get people worrying at that point, and this is the cover of Time magazine in 2005. So then we have the question of which birds is the virus traveling with? And we'll see that there are several species of wildfowl that breed up here in Siberia that have populations that winter in all of those three different flyways. And here we have the sort of the main contenders, I suppose: widgeon, teal, mallard, pintail, shoveler, gadwall, pochard, and tufted duck. And we know that these are birds that can be affected by the virus, and in some cases they were able to see that they found the virus in some species of dabbling duck in particular where they weren't sick. So there's a particular focus on the Eurasian widgeon, who looks very innocent here. The range map here on the right shows you that, as you can see, the breeding in red, they're covering all those flyways. They're wintering in blue. They're across sort of the south of this half of the world, and also up into Iceland and over practically to the Bering Straits on the other end. And just below that this is from Vantour et al. 2021. There was a GPS tagging study to see how far the widgeon wintering in the Netherlands would travel, and they found that individual birds could go 4,000 kilometers on their migration, and they could do 1,000 kilometers in a day. I hope you can't hear. There's a lot of raucous children outside. Apologies if you can. So they also found that when they infected different dabbling ducks with the virus, the widgeon was the one that was most able to be infected without being sick, and to be able to shed lots of virus to pass it on as well. So between 2005 and sort of 2017, this virus or these viruses are traveling around the world along these flyways back and forth. As they go, they're migrating. As they are migrating, they're evolving and reassorting, creating new viruses. So we get used to it, I think, to a certain extent. We start seeing it as something, it's part of the new normal. in the UK, we start seeing that we get outbreaks in poultry sort of every winter. It's very seasonal, and it's associated with those wildfowl migratory movements. And particularly when we have, like if there's a cold snap on the near continent and we get more ducks coming our way, it often coincides with that happening. But it's not killing too many wild birds. It's a problem for the poultry industry, but not really for conservation. And then in sort of like the mid 2010s, we get another family of viruses emerge also in Asia. And they call it 2.3.4.4b. And that's a new family. And for some reason, it's a bit different. It can infect more different species. And it's also very good at creating new viruses itself. And then we start to have more concerning outbreaks from a conservation perspective. So in the winter of 2016 to 17, there was quite a large outbreak in Northern Europe that caused mass mortalities in wild birds. This was H5N8, but it's still the same family that we were talking about. And people started worrying more and they started monitoring it better. So we had Clay et al. In 2017. They estimated that this is in the Netherlands, that the Netherlands lost up to 5% of its wintering population of widgeon and of tufted duck, up to 10% of their wintering population of great blackback gulls, and up to 39% of their wintering population of peregrine falcons. Then in the winter of 2017 to 2018, which is obviously their summer, we had a big outbreak in South Africa. And this is the first time we see it really in seabird breeding colonies on a big scale. The most affected species were swift terns, or also known as greater crested terns. But we also see impacts on globally endangered species for the first time. So the African penguin, the Cape gannet, and the Cape cormorant, those are all globally endangered species. Here they are collecting carcasses of greater crested terns. Okay, and then the winter of 2020 to 2021, we have another outbreak in Northern Europe, mostly in the Wadden Sea. So that's a big wintering area, stopover area for wildfowl and waders. We see a lot of mortality in barnacle geese, widgeon again. And we have a weird situation with knot, where a new virus seems to evolve specifically just in the knot population and kills a load of those, but doesn't seem to go anywhere else. And yeah, they think it killed about 1% of that entire flyway population of Icelandic red knot in the Netherlands. Okay. Then we get a mass mortality of great skuas in the islands around northern Scotland. So first in the Shetlands, then in the Outer Hebrides. And this is the first time, it's the first time we've had a mass mortality we're really worried about in the UK. It's also the first time we've had an outbreak in the summer. So this is quite worrying because it marks a change. The virus is able to survive through the summer, and that changes things. Then in the winter of 2021 to 22, I'm sure we're getting to things people now remember. We have a mass mortality of barnacle geese in the Solway Firth. So this is a main wintering area for barnacle geese that breed in Svalbard. So that's this middle flyway population here. These are three populations of barnacle geese that winter in Northwest Europe. And if we remember the winter before, there was this outbreak in the Wadden Sea that affected barnacle geese on this flyway that breed in northern Russia. So this time it's moved further west and it's affecting the ones in the Solway Firth. And this is H5N1. And sorry, I forgot to say, we think that this outbreak killed at least 20% of this flyway population. So by the end of 2021, things really start heating up. We have the barnacle geese in the Solway Firth. We also have a mass mortality in common cranes in the Hula Valley in Israel, another very important migration wetland. We have another outbreak in South Africa. It hits these Cape cormorants and Cape gannets again. This time they reckon it kills 20% of the national population of Cape cormorants. And at the end of 2020, when we also have the first detection of this virus, this type of virus in North America, and they find it in a great blackback gull in Labrador. And they reckon it got there by going through, well, if we look back at the barnacle geese, you can see it's quite also potentially from seabirds going across the Atlantic. But we still weren't prepared, nowhere near prepared for what happened in 2022. So in the spring of 2022, the virus was detected in the north of Scotland, in eider, in great skuas again, various gulls, and in gannets. At the same time, on the continent in Europe, there was a major outbreak in Greece in Dalmatian pelicans, and there started to be outbreaks in terns across northwestern Europe as well. So then through the summer, the virus spread down the coasts of Great Britain to Wales and England. And we also think it probably also came across the North Sea to East Anglia, probably where the terns were there, possibly with terns moving back and forth. This was also happening around the rest of Northwest Europe, North America. This is a Dalmatian pelican. These are the gannets, great skuas, a pair of roseate tern. In the background is Caspian tern in North America. So now all of a sudden, we're seeing something that is now being called a new threat to wild bird conservation globally. And of course, we know that that's not the only threats wild birds have to deal with. And now that we have had, there was a huge effort in 2023 to survey our seabird colonies and to try and estimate losses. So that was published by Tremlett et al. 2024. And we reckon the UK lost 76% of great skuas, 25% of its gannets, 21% of roseate tern, which is our rarest breeding seabird, 42% of our common tern, 35% of our sandwich tern, and 20% of our great blackback gull. And there was also some work done on the sandwich tern in Europe that they reckon it was at least 17% of the entire Northwest European population of sandwich tern that was lost. And this is obviously one of those famous pictures from the Bass Rock before and after that big gannet tree. And this was rangers collecting carcasses on the Farne Islands. So obviously, we now have a situation where it's lasting through the summer, and that means it's able to infect seabird colonies, which it does very effectively. What that means is this virus can now spread in ways that it couldn't when it was just circulating, we think, in wildfowl. So these are global flyways on land. And these are global flyways at sea. So seabirds get around. Most are migratory to some extent. Some of them can travel very long distances even when they're breeding. And most have populations of younger birds and non-breeding birds that will move between colonies, checking out different colonies before they choose where to settle down, that are called prospecting birds. And that's another way that they could that the virus could spread. And I just wanted to do a quick spotlight on the northern gannet, because I mean, this was obviously terrible, but we were lucky in a sense that so this was on the Bass Rock. They were tagging gannets before the outbreak. They obviously didn't know it was going to happen. So these are breeding gannet. Now they can go a long way just under normal circumstances, just looking for food, 500 kilometers. This map on the left shows the sort of tracks that these birds were doing before the outbreak. Then these here on the right show the tracks that the birds did during the outbreak. So you can see that they're quite different. They've gone up to Norway. It's not normal behavior, but it seems like the birds may have been distressed. Understandably so, to travel a bit further, maybe see what was going on at other colonies. So that's another potential way that the virus could spread. We also have, and this was already a method of transmission, but the more dead birds there are in a massive outbreak, like in contamination, but also the scavenging or predation route infecting other species higher up the food chain. So an awful lot of birds will scavenge. Large gulls, for example, skuas, which we think may have been a factor in the skuas being affected in the first place. But also we start to see more birds of prey going down. So we already talked about peregrines. But we start having and over in North America, they lose a sizable chunk of what is left of the California condor population as well through this route. And then the other thing that we start to see more of is infections in mammals. And so similarly, there's just more dead birds. There's plenty of mammals that would quite happily scuff a dead bird. And we start seeing the odd one of those. So even though this is a bird virus, if you eat an infected carcass as a mammal, you're ingesting so much virus, you get such a high viral load that you potentially get infected. So we start seeing reports of foxes, badgers, lynx, otter, bears, seals, and yeah, even dolphins turning up with the virus. Okay, so over in the Americas, so by autumn 2022, the virus has made its way down into South America from North America, again, probably along the flyways, and it's moved around the coast. And as it's gone, it's caused mass mortalities in seabirds. So Peruvian pelicans, particularly mortalities in South American sea lions and in southern elephant seals. And the southern elephant seals, it caused like 96% mortality in the pups. So basically all the pups died. And that's obviously a worry when you start seeing that many mammals go down. Is it potentially being transmitted from mammal to mammal? That's from Plaza et al. 2024. Then we see in by autumn 2023, it makes it to Antarctica, and obviously via South America, there are several species that sort of would go back and forth. So there are skuas, brown skuas, South polar skuas, kelp gulls, southern giant petrel. But they start seeing lots of brown skuas, as you can see here, going down. Also, elephant seals and fur seals. And it's obviously a worry because, well, for one thing, the most of the wildlife basically in Antarctica, they reckon, is probably susceptible to the virus. And for another thing, they're already dealing with a lot, and a lot of them are already endangered. But also it could spread around the coast of Antarctica and end up in New Zealand and Australia where it hasn't been yet. Okay, so back to our side of the pond. Summer 2023, we had another outbreak in Northern Europe. This time it was a slightly different version of the H5N1 virus that just devastated black-headed gull colonies. So we think we lost about, at least, I think, 10% of the UK's breeding population of black-headed gulls. Also, a lot of summer 2024, just a huge sigh of relief because we didn't really see in summer 2020. Antarctica, South America, New Zealand and Australia are getting worried. And we have this bizarre situation in America with the cows, which is very odd, and no one really has. There's a lot of questions still to be answered, but we've so far had 320 infected in cases where cats have drunk the milk and they have died. It's not clear whether it's going from cow to cow or if it is, how it is happening. And it seems to be infecting them in the mammary glands, which is very weird. So human to human transmission still hasn't happened, but obviously people are quite worried about that. So that's us up to date with the current situation. But I wanted to end on as positive a note as possible. So I have a little section here called Black Eyes and Silver Linings. And I wanted to start with this black-eyed gannet because it's also a bit of a local speciality, I suppose, to some extent. But this is reasons for hope, I suppose. And number one is immunity. So we know that not all of the birds that got infected in 2022 or 2023 died. And there was a study that showed, by Lane et al., that showed that a lot of the gannets that had antibodies, so that had some level of immunity to the disease, which you can only tell by testing their blood, had these black eyes. So that seems to be a sign of having survived the disease. And we were also worried at first that perhaps these birds would be blind, they wouldn't be able to forage, they wouldn't be able to rear chicks. But we now know that they're not blind. They can see. Even birds with two black eyes are hunting successfully and are able to rear chicks. So that's a sign of hope. And they have found immunity in lots of different species as well. So barnacle geese, sandwich tern, common tern, gull-billed tern, herring gull, guillemot, razorbill, puffin, shag, possibly others that I wasn't able to find. Then we have, as a result of this outbreak, we have better monitoring and reporting systems. So we now have an online system for reporting dead wild birds to DEFRA. That's over here. And that's the only way that you will get any dead bird tested. So you have to report it to DEFRA. They will test it if it's triaged to see what it is. And not only does that allow them to tell whether it's the virus or not, it allows them to tell which type of the virus it is. And that's quite important for them trying to figure out how it happened and what's going on. We also didn't have mortality reporting systems. So the reporting to DEFRA, this testing surveillance, it's called, that's about the virus. It's not about the numbers of dead birds that die, and we really needed to be able to track that. And we have systems in place. If you find dead wild birds, report them to DEFRA and also report them on BirdTrack. And that means they can be tested, and it also means we have that information about the population impacts. And do that regardless of what you think the bird may have died of, because there's no way of telling without testing. And that may seem kind of complicated with different emails in different formats. We also have, there's more research going on. So I mentioned about blood sampling. There's a lot more work, I think, to be done where you're looking at the health of wild birds in general, seeing which birds may have the virus but not be sick, what other impacts it might have, whether, for example, they're the pressures they're under, such as stress or not having enough food or potentially mercury levels or whatever, also have a role in whether they succumb to the virus or not. And a sort of an increased recognition that we need to monitor our wild bird populations more effectively. And that includes tagging studies and their movements and things like that as well. Another silver lining is I think there's been increased public awareness, particularly about seabird conservation. I hope it doesn't fall. It does seem from talking to some people that it's been easier to get people to control their dogs and cats with respect to wild birds, because pet dogs and pet cats have died of bird flu, and you really don't want your dog or your cat chewing on a dead bird. Potentially that could help with disturbance issues. Yeah, so a shout out to the people on the front line who were dealing with this in 2022 and 2023 in different parts of the world and different people. These people are heroes and all deserve medals in my book. So whether they were the ones that were doing the extra monitoring, collecting carcasses, doing testing, and not forgetting the virologists in the labs, all the work they've been doing, just trying to understand what's going on. Wonderful, wonderful people. And then the final thing, and I think the most important thing, the most important lesson to be learned, I suppose. And this is a silver lining, because there is more and more feeling, more people calling for this sort of change in attitude and having a sort of a One Health approach. And a One Health approach means recognizing that human health and animal health and the health of livestock, the health of your environment, all these things are linked and interdependent, and that the sort of the disease spillover thing that it is happening more and more. Coronavirus is one of these. These are things that are largely anthropogenic causes. So back to the chickens, we have a huge amount of industrial poultry farming, also industrial pig farming, other animals. The cows in North America, it does seem like the welfare, which is probably contributed. There's inbreeding, there's stress levels, these high densities. You know, we ought to be producing food in an ethical and sustainable way. And also protecting wild habitats. So protected habitats, less disturbed habitats, less degraded habitats are less likely to suffer from disease outbreaks, and they're less likely to spawn a virus that comes into the human population and causes problems for us. So yeah. And yeah, basically not overshoot our planetary boundaries. And hopefully we can start learning some of these lessons and better from a farmer, and working together also all around the world. And that is something I think we are doing better. And that's it. So thank you. Yeah, I have a load of references and things. I'll try and figure out a way of, and useful links, and I'll try and figure out a way of making sure they're on here somehow for people. But there you go.
Thank you very much, Beck. That was really interesting. Yeah,
sorry for the issues.
No, that's fine. We definitely got more than the gist. There was a lot of questions in there. But what I'm proposed to do is probably get those to you later, because the internet connection's cut out once or twice. So I think what we'll do is we'll get you. We'll send some of the questions through, and then make sure that they're added there, maybe as notes to the talk, so people can see them online. That's probably the best way of doing it.
Sure.
So thank you very much. That was really interesting. It was good to see maybe changes in behaviour there, even if it is something that's selfish as not wanting their own dog to die is maybe the way to change the behaviour. But at least that is a positive, and certainly I've seen a lot of the gametes with the black eyes in the colony at Flamborough, and yeah, seem to be doing as well as everything else.
Yeah. Have to hope it lasts. So we all need our shot, our booster every year. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, that'll conclude our series of talks this week. Many thanks again to Beck. It was really interesting, and yeah, we'll end it there. So thank you very much, Beck. Much appreciated from everyone.
And thank you, Migweek.
Thank you.